Hello, welcome. Thank you everybody for joining us today for the second session of LMCC's virtual studio visits with our Workspace artists and residents, which we're thrilled to be presenting as part of Open House New York. My name is Alice Rizzotti, and I'm a curator at LMCC. I'm joining you from Southampton, New York, which are the sacred lands of the Shinnecock Nation. I am a white woman with dark hair wearing a light pink sweater. We're recording today's events, and they will be made available to view on LMCC's website along with yesterday's session. There will be an accompanying transcript to download as well. I'm going to give you a little introduction on LMCC and the Workspace program specifically, and then I'll pass it over to the 5 artists who are part of today's programming. For almost 50 years, LMCC has been the leading force in supporting independent artists and communities across New York City. We do this in a number of ways, including grants as the largest regranter of city and state funds to artists and organizations, residencies that support around 100 artists and arts groups annually, and public presentations, which include exhibitions, as well as our annual River to River Festival. We also operate a beautiful 40,000 square foot art center at Governor's Island, where a lot of our residencies and programming takes place. All of our work is free and open to the public. Our flagship residency program is Workspace, a 9-month studio residency based in Lower Manhattan that focuses on creative practice development for emerging artists. In addition to studios, Workspace offers space for experimentation and dialogue with peers and arts professionals, as well as career advancement opportunities. In order to find space for our residency program, LMCC operates a really unique model, working with real estate partners to transition otherwise vacant prime real estate into free studio spaces for artists. Since the late 1990s, LMCC has had a history of working with some of the most iconic buildings downtown, including the former World Trade Center, the Woolworth Building, the Equitable Building, and 28 Liberty, which was formerly known as Chase Manhattan Plaza. Since last September, LMCC's Workspace has been given studio space at 101 Greenwich, generously donated by our partners Cove Property Group and Bethnal Green Oak. By creating space for artist production just blocks from Wall Street, the Workspace program redefines what it means to work in Lower Manhattan. The global health crisis, which we find ourselves, has really forced us to dramatically shift our approach to the residency program. We had to close our studios back in mid-March and have gradually reopened the facilities as of late summer. We had to bring our programming and cohort-facing activities online, and this group showed an immense collective resiliency and care for one another during this difficult time. Our collective participation in these studio visits is a demonstration of this, and we're really so pleased and proud to be able to share it with you all here today. In addition to our generous real estate partners, Cove Property Group and Bethnal Green Oak, I also wanted to thank the funders of Workspace, Cowles Charitable Trust, the Gladys Crable Delmas Foundation, Jacques and Natasha Gelman Trust, May and Samuel Rudin Foundation, Norman and Bettina Roberts Foundation, the Mats Gilmore Foundation, Milton Sally Avery Arts Foundation, and the Stavros Niarchos Foundation. And so, without further ado, I will pass it on to the main event. This is the second session of the studio visits that we've done, made up of 5 artists from the current Workspace cohort. We are joined by Lee Sanford, Sara Jimenez, Kevin Bonilla, Beatrice Glow, and Gabriel Garcia Román. In forming these groups, we thought about how their work intersects with one another through themes and concepts. These artists' work touch upon ideas including and around colonialism, identity, performance, mythologies, shifting narratives, history, place, and healing. So a lot of things to delve into. Each of these artists will briefly present their work, and then they'll be asked a few questions from a fellow cohort member before moving on to the next artist. There'll be time at the end of the program for questions from the audience, so please submit any questions that you have throughout the session via the comment section of the YouTube stream, and make sure to include if the questions are directed at a specific artist or for the group as a whole. And now I'd like to welcome Lee Sanford to the virtual podium to kick us off. Hi, Amy.
Hi, thank you, Alice. Hi, everyone. I'd like to thank Open House New York, the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, and this year's Workspace artists in making this event happen. Okay, let's begin. My name is Amy Lee Sanford. I'm an Asian woman with short black hair and big black eyeglasses. I am a Cambodian diaspora sculptor. In the mid-1970s, just before the small nation of Cambodia was overtaken by communist guerrilla forces, I was very young and I was sent out of the country for my safety. The rest of my immediate family stayed in Cambodia, and they all died due to the regime known as the Khmer Rouge. My work begins with the narratives, relationships, and histories that were disrupted and lost. I piece together personal and collective memory through a variety of media. My work explores concepts of trauma, erasure, healing, absence, fragmentation, repair, and transformation. The first few images I'll share come from my earlier work, followed by my more recent pieces. This is an image from Full Circle, a 6-day durational performance, first exhibited in 2012 at Meta House Gallery in Phnom Penh with the support of Java Arts. During this performance, I sit in a circle of 40 traditional utilitarian clay pots. I stand and I let the pot fall to the floor and shatter. After collecting the scattered fragments, I sit down and repair the pot with glue and string, locating each piece and fitting it back together to form the original pot shape, but now with holes and hollow areas that are beyond repair. This is the process I repeat for every pot. Since 2012, I've created several iterations of this piece. I've performed and exhibited related images and videos in many types of art and public spaces. This work has been shown on 4 continents, including at the Roskilde Museum in Denmark, the University of Melbourne, the Changwon Asian Art Festival in South Korea, Haus der Kunst in Munich, and Incube Arts here in New York. In one of these subsequent performances, I moved the work out of doors and performed a single break pot performance. This is an image from Tree Island break pot sketch, where I repaired one pot at a busy intersection in Phnom Penh in the heat of an unusually windy day. No one spoke to me as I performed, but people did stop to watch. I first returned to Cambodia in 2005, over 30 years after I'd first left. I'd located 2 members of my extended family. After that exhilarating and exhausting visit, I revisited a large stash of letters that my late American mother kept safe. This work here introduces the start of my artwork that reflects on airmail correspondence that my Cambodian father sent to my American mother between the late 1960s and mid-1970s. Although they both passed decades ago, the letters still haunt me today. This is Suspended, a mixed media installation with audio and light filters shown at Providence College and at Laconia Gallery in Boston. Over 70 copper wire sculptures hang at different heights. Inside each sculpture is a thin piece of copper with words stamped onto it. The installation was a vehicle for questions, thoughts, and responses directed toward my late father in response to reading his correspondence. The words in the sculpture shown now are, "Papa, I wish I could telephone you, but I do not know how to dial the past." This image is a video still of Scanning, a 44-minute long video from 2013, shown at Framer Framed in Amsterdam, Topaz Arts in Queens, and acquired by the Singapore Art Museum. One by one, I placed my father's letters on a scanning bed and digitized them. This process is repeated for the length of the video. The only sounds come from the scanning technology and the rustle of the old onion skin paper. This image is from my 2015 video Cascade, which was exhibited in a solo show at the Bathurst Regional Art Gallery in New South Wales, Australia, at the National Museum in Cambodia, and at SF Camera Work in California. I printed a letter from my father's 1972 letter onto 60 identically shaped glass tiles. The camera focuses on my hands, as it does in many of my videos. I match and fit the tiles together to form the complete letter, which I read aloud at the end. Most recently, I've been working primarily in collage. I layer translucent paper over my father's letters, creating a visual barrier. These 3 images show progressive stages of the layering process. This collage is titled, "If All Goes Well, Peace Will Be Restored." In January 1973, my father wrote about feeling light and hopeful about a new ceasefire and potential peace treaty involving the US that could reestablish stability in Southeast Asia. As the world knows, peace did not come to the region then. This is the same collage with even more layers applied. As you can see, most of the handwriting is not visible anymore. This diptych collage is titled, "Everyone Was Surprised." In May 1972, my father returned to Cambodia after a trip to the US. He wrote that everyone at home was surprised that he'd decided to return and not remain abroad. The last collage I'll share is called "By All Means." This is a detail of the work, which is also a work in progress. And here is a second detail image. All of these images, video trailers, and more are available to view on my website, amyleesanford.com. I am also on Instagram at amyleesanford. I'd like to close now while a video plays. This video is titled "Stria," which has been exhibited with the diptych collage at the Grimshaw Gudeshwe Gallery in Massachusetts. It will play on silent as I answer questions. Thank you all for your interest and for your time. I think Kevin might have some questions for me.
Yes. Hello. Hi, Amy, and hello, everyone. My name is Quiles Bonilla. I will present a little bit later, but I had some questions for Amy. First of all, I just wanted to say, as an artist and as a friend, I really wanted to thank you for your generosity in presenting this very personal work, which I absolutely love. And seeing you engage in it in the studio was really, yeah, I really enjoyed that process. So the first question that I had was regarding the performance full circle. And I wanted to ask you what went through the process of selecting the materials for this project.
Hi, Kevin. Thanks for your question. Well, I wanted to use an object that everyone in Cambodia recognizes and has to some extent used. The pots are used to hold common things, like water or food. And if the pot breaks, it's obviously not functional anymore. I mean, they're just pit fired outside and they're very fragile. So it's really nonsensical to try and fix it, right? So the idea is that one can never really repair the whole or the original whole, but that the item, once you try to repair it, is actually transformed. It's transformed in the process of repair, right? Something new has been created.
Yeah, and I absolutely adore this idea of how by putting it together, you're still showing the scar. So it's almost like you're putting temporality into the object, which it's a really beautiful piece.
Exactly. I'm also a potter, so it's I'm drawn to clay, in the earth.
Yeah. And then my follow-up question was regarding the scanning work, which I also adored, because I think archiving and scanning, I would refer to more as archiving. It feels like this is more like an activity that is often done like in the shadows, and it's often like not recorded or archived, that process itself. So I wanted to ask you what went through the decision of turning this process often unseen and then making it into a work of art in its own right?
That's a really good question, Kevin. I don't think anybody has actually asked me a question like that about scanning. The act of preservation is really part of the story. It's not just the end product. The work that goes into the preservation, like the dedication, the patience, the toil, that is the story. And therefore making this process visible in scanning is important. the repetitive nature of placing a letter after letter on the scanning bed, repeating an act of preserving this important history, this important moment in time, which was soon to be destroyed. It's a way of reclaiming it, saying that this won't be lost as well.
Absolutely.
And in a lot of my work, I use the slow repetition of an act, whether it's fitting my pottery shards together or figuring out square tiles. I think there's a beauty to slow cyclical movement, and in a way, it's comforting.
I agree. Yeah, and I love this action of sort of bringing in light to this process. As a fellow researcher, myself, I love being in the archives, and I absolutely love that. So, thank you again very much for your presentation. I believe now we're going to pass it on to our next presenter, which is Sara Jimenez. Thank you, Amy. Mwah.
Thanks, Kevin.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Amy. That was so awesome. I really love hearing about your work. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Sara Jimenez. I go by she, her. I'm a Filipinx-Canadian multidisciplinary artist with freckles and long brown hair. In my work, I seek and research erased histories. So this first slide that we're looking at is a shot of a multi-channel video that's a work in process that I started while at LMCC. It's called The Sun Must Be Hidden, inspired by my research of volcanic landscapes, portraiture of Filipino women in the 19th century, and histories of resilience and healing around pre-colonial Filipino women. Next slide, please. Thanks. This is a screenshot from a different multi-channel video from about 1.5 years ago called For the View is Duplicated There. The scenery that you're looking at is made from digitally manipulated images of photos and sculptures that are sourced from scanned architectural imagery from American colonial texts. On a green screen, I don't know if you can see me in the corner peeking out there, I perform a feminine feline presence that reclaims this space. Next. This is an image of an immersive installation that I did at Wave Hill called The Edge of Dwelling. It's entirely made out of paper mache. The original architectural images are sourced from American colonial texts that were documenting the Philippines after the Spanish-American War. Mixed in with these photos are images of buildings from Wave Hill, where this installation was located, that have similar architectural facades. A 3-channel soundscape is hidden inside of the installation, which was created by Finnish musician Launau. Next. For the closing of the installation, I performed live with Launau. I removed the sculptures from the space, I scattered them across the lawn of Wave Hill, and then I reconstructed the installation in front of a live audience. During this, Launau performed simultaneously using her voice as well as mixed field recordings from the site. This is an image of a work called Silent Malady, which is a paper hanging sculpture made from printed imagery from the Philippines between the 15th century until today. The strips of printed imagery are digitally and physically painted red. I think about this piece as a fragment of the poisoned tropics. One of the questions I had was, what would the color of the landscape be if the trauma of the past was visible? This is another iteration of this series of hanging sculptures called Itinerant Maladies. This iteration was in a circular formation and was hollow in the center. Inside, it was filled with fuchsia LED lights. The interior was used as a performative space that I invited other artists to activate it and to respond to the work. This is actually currently on display in the West Village. It's called The Scenery is Never Monotonous. It's a mini installation in the West Village inside of one of the windows of Art and Buildings properties. I created a fictional terrarium modeled after plants invasive to the US that were brought here from different East and Southeast Asian countries in the early 1900s as ornamental additions. This is a recent print I just completed called Radiating from a Dark Cloud. It's currently on view at the Editions Artist Book Fair. It's inspired by staged portraiture by American and European photographers of the Filipinx population. I use my own body as the subject object in the image, and the landscape in the background is digitally composed from multiple photos taken in the Arabia Mountains in Atlanta, Georgia. Erdusia 4 is from a series of performative photos taken on the salt flats of Utah. Erdusia was a pre-colonial legendary warrior princess, first recorded by Muslim scholar Ibn Battuta in the 14th century. The garment that I'm wearing in this photo is made of stitched colonial photos and fabric. Cenotaph is a public fabric installation that was on view at the Oakland Cemetery in Atlanta, Georgia. It's a monument commemorating the 872 probable unmarked burials in the African-American section that were discovered in 2016 and are still being uncovered and identified. It was placed in a magnolia tree next to the Line of the Confederacy, a pre-existing sculpture commemorating the unknown Confederate dead. This is another piece that was on view at Atlanta, Georgia, called Where X and Y Slip. It was in Woodruff Park. I created loose billowing grids from metallic fabrics while at LMCC. This piece formally responds to the concrete vertical grids of the corporate buildings that surround the park. The sculpture is inspired by the problematic system of urban expansion in the downtown area and its effect on marginalized bodies. And finally, this is an image of an installation from this summer called A Setting. It was a fabric installation at 5 Miles in collaboration with writer and political activist Jason Schwartz. We created a room inspired by the sense of grief, pause, reflection, and care that arrive at the day's end. Sorry. I don't know why I'm getting emotional. The time of sunset has taken on a new significance in 2020. It marks the end of another day during the pandemic, during uprisings for social and racial justice, and during national fragmentation and uncertainty. Okay, next slide, please. I'm now gonna play, I was really inspired by Amy's format, so I'm gonna play a silent clip from my first video that I showed a still image of, and this will play as I chat a bit with Amy and we have a conversation.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Thanks so much. That was really a powerful presentation. And I love that you're also working with reclaiming erased histories. You know, Sarah's studio is right near mine. And I remember seeing Sarah working on the big fabric grid, which is the current window installation, and other works.
I wish I could be with you all in person.
Pardon?
I wish I could be with you all in person right now.
Some of your work employs robust color, while other work draws from a gray palette. What is color? How does color play a role in your artistic process?
Each project I use color. Obviously, I gravitate towards reds and pinks a lot, which each project has a very specific story around that. But I originally started shifting to that color palette when I started making the hanging sculptures. So the image of Silent Malady that we looked at earlier, I had originally made a different version called Nostalgic Fatigue, where I wanted the paper sculpture to take on the visual language of a kind of theatrical prop, where it looked like kind of a fake part of a landscape. And so I had it be like greens and yellows and things like that. But I started to become more curious about this question of not just camouflaging the history, but what is the emotional and energetic effect that this history has on the land itself? And what if the land itself wasn't this object that had actions enacted upon it and then were erased? But what if the landscape absorbs what we do and then radiates out a color? What would that color be? What would it feel like? And for me, that first version, I started thinking about like something kind of poisonous, something toxic, something radioactive, something seductive, something of the body. And so I started using this kind of oversaturated reds as my beginning color palette. But then sometimes I go back to this kind of more neutral tones. So in the installation, The Edge of Dwelling, which is more of that urban architectural space, I wanted to immerse the meaning of the mythology of these historical texts that created these narratives around the people and the landscape of the Philippines. And so in these books, you have these cropped framed photos that are black and white, that are very staged, creating very particular colonial narratives of the people. And so I liked the idea of taking that same visual language, this sort of authority of a black and white photo of the past, but then having it take on this other meaning that's kind of apocalyptic and eerie and unknown. So depending on the project, it shifts, but that's some of the origin.
Wow. When I look at your installations, I notice that you often use fabric and paper to define and occupy space. Can you talk a little more about this?
Yes. So to be honest, the very first reason I did this was because I was originally working in plaster and I felt like I was working in a stone quarry every day in the studio. And I was so physically tired because not only is the content so heavy, but then the physicality of it was so heavy. And I started wondering, why am I putting my body through this suffering in addition to also trying to be this emotional channel for things that are really complicated and heavy? And so I started wanting to play with this idea of weight, like, what does it mean to, if something has emotional weight and physical weight and historical weight, but how can I also care for my body in that process where I have like the energy to like channel and have a relationship with it. And so that was sort of the beginnings, but I'll just get more specific. For example, The Edge of Dwelling, that urban landscape, I wanted it to appear like empire from far away. And so when you enter this, or when you see it at a first glance, it looks like this kind of neoclassical, majestic kind of weird space. But then I wanted people to get up close and then realize that these architectures were actually made out of paper and were fragile and were light. And so I liked that play with theatricality, where from a distance, there could be this facade of this signaling, and then you get close and that dissolves and you realize that these things are light and these things are movable and these things aren't fixed. So that's this play with like weight and the content has been really important throughout my work in different ways.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Sara.
Thanks, Amy. And it's my great pleasure to introduce my next friend and amazing artist, Beatrice.
It's such an honor to speak right after Sara and Amy. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I am Beatrice Glow. I'm a Taiwanese American woman with long black hair and wearing a white and black shirt. I have been a settler in the homelands of the Munsee Lenape and the Matinecock for over 16 years. And I make multidisciplinary research creations to share how history impacts our shared futures. And a question that has haunted me for many years is, what does colonialism smell like? How is it that the taste for aromatic spices spiraled into global trade networks, motivated colonization, and quote unquote discovery of America? Are Magellan and Columbus simply spice hunters instead of explorers? So with that, I installed Aromerica Parfumer, a pop-up perfumery in a Chilean shopping mall to question luxury and its connection to dispossession and enslavement. I wanted to know, what is it in the alluring fume of perfume of plants, such as tobacco, pepper, cacao, cinnamon, these commonplace objects that brought people to navigate oceans, but also motivated massacres, human trafficking, the very foundations of neoliberalism that we live. So one spice that I've been fixated on is nutmeg, that changed the world. They used to only grow in the Banda Islands of present-day Indonesia. And in the 17th century spice wars, the Dutch and the English were fighting over this archipelago. They eventually signed the Treaty of Breda in 1667, wherein the Dutch traded Manhattan, Mannahatta, then a backwater trading post, for Run, one of the Banda Islands, also their first English colony. So that was when New Amsterdam became New York. This exchange was intertwined with displacement, dispossession, and enslavement that shape our present and mark the violent rise of multinational corporations, as in this process, 15,000 Bondanese were massacred by the Dutch East India Company in pursuit of dominating the nutmeg trade. So as an artist, wondering how can I bring forth Manhattan and Bonda's shared histories as well as environmental futures while centering the Bondanese and Munsee Lenape, the original peoples of Manhattan, I imagined a portal of communication between the two islands. So that pink shape I showed imagines room layered onto Manhattan. And in the very beginning, in 2015, to start this, I created this Manhattan Tea Room, an installation that uses everyday objects that carry historical weight. So I asked if objects can speak, what would they say? I collage archival images and my own drawings referencing the spice wars onto tableware that evoke luxurious yet bloody porcelain that were traded on the spice routes. And when people entered, they could smell spicy senses envelop their senses. And here, this teapot showed the beheading in reference to a genocide of 1621 that took place here in Fort Nassau, a star-shaped fort in the Banda Islands that also has the same shape as Fort Amsterdam of Lower Manhattan, the same space as the Smithsonian National Museum American Indian at Bowling Green, also a massacre site of the Lenape. Also, Fort Jay on Governor's Island and Fort Wood, the foundation of Statue of Liberty, are also star forts. These forts are often markers of colonial trauma. I found them from Ghana to my homeland in Taiwan and also New York and Indonesia. So as a daughter of immigrants and a settler, in 2016, I sought to connect deeply with the land and started mapping dispossession in New York. I found that Broadway is part of a matrix of indigenous pathways. I began collaborating with Native culture bearers, historians, ecologists to create this work, Lenape Way, on Lower Broadway. At the center of this window, you see this light box from the Mannahatta project created by Dr. Eric Sanderson. And I layered onto it Lenape settlements and pathways to help passerbys locate themselves within the homelands of the Lenape. And we made this Mannahatta VR project together, an interactive VR experience that brings forth the past futures of a Broadway block, where you can actually use archery to shoot down monuments that perpetuate settler colonial myths. And you could also meet culture bearers, such as here, Chief Vincent Mann in the Ramapo Lenape Nation, connect with the original ecologies of Mannahatta, and hear the stories of the land from the original peoples. While making this work, I was also invited to intervene in a Manhattan millionaire row mansion, the James B. Duke House on Fifth Avenue. And given this mansion was built from tobacco revenue, I installed prints on silk that tell the story of plants that changed the world. I then organized a symposium to connect the wealth of tobacco merchants and American foundations to the dispossession of Native peoples and the brutality of plantation culture. Here you see Lenape Elder George Stoneford smudging the Duke House event attendees. So this experience in a mansion that rose from smoke inspired my current multimedia project, where I use virtual reality as a platform to sculpt pseudo artifacts linked to tobacco social history to then generate videos and 3D prints to portray the Empire Smoke, a fictional quadrillionaire family. The project is set in 2040 when Empire Smoke had relocated into a bunker as a climate catastrophe accelerated and left behind a collection that provides clues to dubious wealth provenance and the development of the Capitolocene, our current age of ecological crisis brought by rampant capitalism. So my 5 minutes are more than over. So I'd like to invite artist Sara Jimenez right before to come and share and exchange with me. Hi, Sara.
Hey, Beatrice. I'm so excited to talk to you about your work. I wish we had an hour to unpack one of your projects because they're so thoughtful and complex. I guess I want to start off with so much of your work, obviously very, very thoughtfully researched and also in really deep collaboration with many different communities. And I wanted to hear more about how you develop and collaborate with some of the communities that you work with. What is the origin story and how do you navigate the nuances of representation and speaking alongside these communities and histories?
Yeah, thank you, Sara, for the observation. This is definitely a very long process, but For boiling it down, I think it always comes to questioning where we come from. And for me, I mentioned my family's from Taiwan. So it's a place of heavy settler colonial history, but also very vibrant indigenous culture that continues to stay sovereign. So for me, I always grew up questioning, where do I stand in a power matrix, and where can I, growing up in the US, continue to work in allyship intersectionally. So wherever possible, I've chosen to amplify voices of communities, and I learned a lot and made lots of mistakes in the process, but people have been very patient with me. And in 2016, I had this really amazing, life-changing experience where I was an artist in resident at the Asian Pacific American Institute at NYU. And there was a Polynesian double-hull canoe called Hokulea that was circumnavigating the road on traditional wayfinding techniques. And they were coming to New York City. And they said that they can't land until they are greeted by the original peoples, their proper indigenous cultural protocols. So for me, it was an opportunity as artist in resident to kind of, in a way, use an exhibition format, a laboratory, work with students to activate New Yorkers to engage deeply with the land and build relationships with the Lenape people. And in that very process, I really started to cultivate friendships. Kinship, I would say, is actually a word that comes into my mind. And we continue whenever I can. We built the projects Manapata VR to always invite culture bearers to come and develop the story together, to speak to the general public. We share space, and I never consider myself a placeholder, but more as someone who was just trying to hold the space until communities are ready to or have more capacity to deal with a lot of the cultural organizations that want to ask. So we always try to collaborate, and it's a never-ending process, and I make lots of mistakes, but we keep learning. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Beatrice. I'm trying to be good. I brought up so many other questions that I'm so interested in because I find your work so great, but I'm trying to stay to my script. The other question I have for you is around the concept of interaction. It comes up again and again in your different projects. It comes up when you create sense and viewers have a sensorial experience of the spaces that you create. It comes up in these VR experiences that become interactive and also are sensorial. And then obviously it comes up in your actual collaborations. And I would love to hear more about this idea of interaction, of participation, and what it means for you in terms of the kind of experience you want to facilitate.
Yes, and I think you do this very much the same way, where we think about being an artist as having a public platform. And we have the power and the audience to continue to work together to shape worldviews. And the general public always has a lot to teach me. So I try to think about many access points in a process-oriented way of making research creations. So the scent, for example, that you mentioned, or the VR, there are all ways in which we can come together, and we're all learning about these different invisible dimensions to kind of come up with new language that, when we think about visual culture, there's already so much that has been done, but smell is a space where we all have an opinion, and there's a less of a hierarchy. Like if you smell something, you like it, you will react. If you don't like it, you also have a strong opinion. And I think that brings a diverse audience into the space to have conversations. So this is why I really think about access points in my projects. Yeah, I hope that kind of makes sense what I'm saying here.
Totally. Thank you so much, Beatrice.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Well, now I would like to pass the mic on over to Gabriel. Gabriel, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. Thank you, Beatrice, for your work. I'm always blown away by the amount of research that goes into your work. So thank you for that. Next slide, please. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gabriel Garcia Román, a Latinx cisgender man with short hair, prominent nose, and a mustache. I was born in Zacatecas, Mexico, migrated to Chicago at a young age, and currently living on Lenape land. I'm a multimedia artist, mostly working in photo-based and fiber art. Today, I'm going to talk to you about two projects. The first is Queer Icons, a portrait series that highlights the nobility and power of the queer and transgender folks of color. Next slide, please. The portraits are intaglio prints, collaged with highly ornate papers. All the color you see are hand-cut and collaged onto the print using metallic and iridescent papers to give the prints dimension. Next slide, please. The series serves to canonize activists, community organizers, and artists on account of their resistance, power, and altruism. I asked the sitter to stare out into the viewer to show their defiance and resiliency. The texts you see are handwritten musings, manifestos, or poetry handwritten by the sitter. As a community that is often erased and marginalized, it's an important addition in further amplifying their voice. The portraits themselves interrupt commonplace motifs and the status quo by centering identities that are othered, such as HIV folks, those that are disabled, fat, and those that disrupt traditional family structures. Next slide, please. I make custom wooden frames for each print, which are my ornate interpretation of Rococo frames you might see in cathedrals across Mexico. This last ornate touch is a meticulous labor of love in honor of their visionary contributions to our community. What once started as a personal project, the series has now become a living community archive. Next slide, please. The second project I'm working on explores the resiliency and dignified valor of immigrant and working class labor. While brands like Carhartt and Dickies are often emblematic or common uniforms for laborers, I wanted to delve further into my cultural imagination. Next slide, please. Here I've infused elements of my culture into worker uniforms and deliberately incorporated hand embroidery to drive the idea of labor, as well as the cultural traditions of Mexico. Before the pandemic, I often found myself practicing my hand embroidery alongside New York City's workers on public transportation while on my way to work. Next slide, please. The front of this cap, I've embroidered a typical Mexican landscape to reference land and belonging, migration and borders, and yearning for home. And I often use the cactus as a symbol for resiliency and for resiliency. Next slide, please. Here I'm referencing the symbolic jaguar headpiece, a long revered indicator of cosmic strength and agility, which is often worn during indigenous celebrations throughout Mexican and Mesoamerican cultures. Next slide, please. I've meticulously set individually hand-painted rivets on the hard hat to recreate the prominent jaguar. Next slide, please. The rivets and hard hat are two elements used in construction and manufacturing, two industries that historically employ a lot of immigrant and working class labor. I've set the headpiece on a mirrored platform to pull out what's usually in the shadows. Next slide, please. Here I'm referencing the exploitation and extraction of labor and culture. I printed day laborers onto a commercially made sarape print, as opposed to a traditional Mexican Mexican textile. Next slide, please. These last two pieces came about during the pandemic. I was thinking about the unrecognized tenacity of essential workers, restaurant workers, and delivery drivers. Next slide, please. These wooden sculptures are a nod to them, capable of bearing heavy weight, just as the immigrant labor continues to hold our city together in unprecedented ways. The last project is still in its infancy, but I'm excited to continue to explore these ideas and concepts. Thank you for your time.
Hello, Gabriel. Thank you so much.
Beatrice.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your work. I was really reflecting on when I got to come up with questions for you, how I got to really sit across from you in our workspace and really see you taking so much time and care every single night. You know, you're just laboring away quietly, making beautiful objects. So there's so much detail and craft that you bring to your work. And my question is that, can you share more why you deliberately choose to make your process so time consuming, demanding, and labor intensive?
Yeah, sure, Beatrice. Thanks for that question. I've thought about this question so many times, and there's so many reasons, right? Like, one is that I really enjoy the process of making things. They become like meditation, like meditative acts for me. Not only that, but I always think like, if I didn't like cry, sweat, or bleed into my work, then did I really put myself into it? But most recently, I think what has stuck with me is that I was listening to an artist talk earlier in the summer, and I heard this artist speak about his work also, and he mentioned something that really struck with me, and it like struck me to the core, which is that as first generation immigrants, being the first ones to go to college and watching your parents toil day in, day out, like there's a sense of guilt that comes there's a sense of guilt where you decide to become an artist and not like what your parents think of as professionals. So it's almost like I'm putting in all of those hours of labor that my parents did into my own work.
Wow. I guess that makes me think about also, you're speaking not just about personal history, but you're also amplifying community narratives. So that brings me to think about the notion of generosity in your work. Can you talk a little bit more, because I saw so many images of individuals that you're highlighting. Can you speak about how you use bring this generous spirit in your platform to highlight specific individuals and narratives through your community-centered approach, please?
Sure. So, I mean, like I mentioned with this project, it started off as a personal project, and the more that I shared it with people, the more that the project just grew and made me appreciate all the broad spectrum of folks that are within our community. And it was a way that I felt like I wanted to include as many people as possible, and also make it so that it's people that are constantly or that are often erased or not given a platform. Since I already have an existing platform, I felt like it was my duty or my obligation to my community to include as many people as I could to amplify their voice, you know. Yeah, so that's really where a lot of my work comes from with queer icons, and even with the work that I'm currently working on right now. Yeah, it's just a way to, like I mentioned earlier, like just amplify their voice further.
Thank you so much. That's really, really beautiful. I look forward to our own studio visit coming up soon. But in the meantime, I think we're welcoming Kevin to the space now to share his fabulous work. Thanks, Gabriel.
Hello. Thank you so much, Gabriel. And I'm just gonna throw out there to the universe that it is one of my goals in life to one day be a part of Gabriel's Queer Icon series. Just throwing it out there to the universe. But thank you so much. So hello, hola todos. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Kevin Quiles Bonilla, and I am gonna time myself. So one moment. Here we go. So gender preferred pronouns are he, him, or they, them. For those who are visually impaired, I am a young brown boy in my mid-20s. I have curly black hair, black eyeglasses, black headphones, and a black t-shirt. And I'm coming to you from the Lenape land, also known as Manhattan. Today, I wanted to focus on one of the projects that I started while doing the residency, but beforehand, I wanted to give some context into some of the themes that I like to touch base upon. So thank you for the first slide. So through photography, video, and performance, I explore the constant transits of the colonial individual, transiting between the colony, Puerto Rico, and the mainland, the US. And in the process, I'm also interested in exploring the amalgamation of questionings, outcomes, and consequences that comes with inhabiting this space, not only as a Puerto Rican, but also as a person of color, as a queer person, as a person with a disability, and as a diasporic person. So ultimately, I'm really interested in how colonialism sort of affects all of these intersections that I inhabit. This first project that I'm showing is from a series that I started in 2010. It's a photographic series titled Carryover Blue Tarp. And I was really interested in exploring the blue tarp because it became a very iconographic material in Puerto Rico post-Hurricane Maria. These blue tarps were given to families who've suffered a lot of damage in their houses. And it was meant to be this temporary solution that would then become a long-term solution. Next slide, please. Thank you. It's already obviously been 3 years since the passing of Hurricane Maria, and unfortunately, there's this really high number, approximately 20 to 30,000 houses in the island still have a blue tarp covering their houses. And so I was really interested in this project, exploring what would it be like for the body to replace the structure, or rather the body becoming the precarious structure that needed protection. Next slide, please. Another material that became quite iconographic in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria was the paper towel. And it's specifically because of this moment right now on the screen. This is a very rough study of that I had in my studio, but I wanted to include it again to give some context. This was during the current US president's visit to Puerto Rico right after the passing of Hurricane Maria. He stayed approximately for 4 hours, and in between that visit, he stopped by a local church and began throwing paper towels at the locals. And I was really, first of all, I was really shocked. And then I was really interested in how this material that is often related to the house, the domestic, became such a violent tool against Puerto Ricans. And so that was the starting point for the current project that I'm working on. Next slide, please. So this installation is titled To Absorb and Contain, and this is a very small scale rendering of the installation that I have in mind. So I decided to reclaim the paper towel as a container of memory. And I went to the archive of the different speeches and statements that the president gave regarding Puerto Rico, and I began deconstructing them and printing them onto each sheet of a paper towel roll through silkscreen printing. Next slide, please. These are some of the details. I wanted to see how could I expand the project. And so I then brought in also the voice of the former governor of Puerto Rico, who got ousted out of power in the summer of last year, when a leaked chat with his officials was presented to the press, and it revealed misogynistic comments, homophobic comments, and even comments that were making fun of the people that passed away because of the hurricane. Next slide, please. This is one of the examples, one of the details of the paper towel with the print of the outline of Puerto Rico. Next slide, please. And these are some other of the examples that I've been working on while at the studio. So the iteration that I have in my mind for this project is for it to become a large-scale installation where all of these paper towels are sort of hanging in at different levels of the wall, but covering the entire wall. Next slide, please. The next part for this project is to include the voice of Puerto Ricans to sort of combat these two very negative voices. So I've been keeping an archive of the different protest signs that were created last summer during the protests on the island. And I will be including that to also bring in the voice of Puerto Ricans into this installation, which to me is the most important of all. Next slide, please. This last slide I wanted to include because it's an example of some of the recent sort of memes of images that have been surfacing on the internet following the president's announcement that he contracted COVID. Oh, sorry, I'm almost done. That he contracted COVID, and I wanted to share it not as a joking, as a laughing matter, as a joke, but rather as a notion that even though this event that's linked to this material happened 3 years ago, people still remember. And it is important for people to remember, not only to create this material, but also to go out voting. So that is what I'm working on at the moment. If you'd like to see more about my work, I invite you to check out my website, which will be presented at the end of the speech. And now I would like to welcome back Gabriel. Hi.
Hi, Kevin. Thank you so much for showing us your work.
Thank
And
you.
like I had the pleasure of seeing you work across from my studio, and
Yeah.
just to see this project just develop over the months, it's been great. So,
Thank you.
so I have a question.
Mhm.
So I find it interesting that you use tarp, which repels water, and paper towels, which absorbs it. Can you talk a little bit about your choice of materials?
Thank you so much for bringing that, because that is, I feel, is very important for both of these works in particular. Yeah, so what drew me to these materials was obviously the very direct context that they have to the recent history of Puerto Rico. As I mentioned, this became very specific materials to the history of Puerto Rico. And not only myself, but I've seen a lot of Puerto Rican artists that are finding ways in how to incorporate these materials to then sort of speak about the current situation of the island. But absolutely, no, I love how almost like they're almost like contraries to a certain extent, these two materials. Like the tarp is meant to sort of protect that thing that is covering from outside, from rain or from, just from the outside. While then the paper towel is meant to be this material that sort of like absorbs and contains, that's where the title sort of came from. So yeah, I was really interested in how with the photographic work, I was sort of becoming the object that needed protection. But then with the paper towel, I then wanted to sort of use all of these voices, not only of those two very negative voices, but then the voices of Puerto Ricans, to sort of be absorbed and contained by these materials to a certain extent. But more than anything is so that it can become a reminder for moments like the moment that we're at right now, where we all need to go vote. Those of us who have the privilege, to go out and vote.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. I appreciate your response. And finally, what are you currently working on, or are there future projects right now?
Yeah, so at the moment, I am presenting some performance work as part of the Immigrant Artist Biennial's online exhibition, which is titled Here Together. The performance work complements, it's all, to me, it's all part of like the same themes that I'm exploring. It's about colonialism and otherness. And so I invite everyone to check it out. It is online and it will be there until December. And then next year, I will have my first solo show in the US, which I'm really nervous. I'm a Virgo and you're a Virgo too. So I am really nervous, but I'm very, very excited to hopefully see this specific installation, the paper towel installation, to be presented in its full iteration in that space. Yeah.
Wow. Well, congratulations on your show. Definitely, I'm excited to see when once you put out that information for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. And I am gonna bring now to the stage Alice. Hi, Alice.
Hi. Thank you guys so much. It's the best listening to you speak about your work. I see that we're at 1 o'clock, but we have a couple of questions. So I want to get to, maybe we'll see if we can get 2 in just before we have to tune out. So the first one I'm going to give is for Amy. And our audience member wrote, Amy, thank you for your presentation. Is it part of your creative process to consider how this work speaks to history repeating itself in relation to regime change around the globe currently?
That's a really good question. It's not necessarily part of my process because I work from a personal place, but the ideas I work with, cultural genocides and the ideas I work with are relevant to other cultural genocides, other regime changes, and also to personal histories of trauma. I think the ideas of preserving histories and narratives, healing from trauma, and repairing that which has been broken are really universal. And I'd actually like to pass this question on to any of the other artists who might want to pick up on this.
And otherwise, I have a question for everybody else as well, unless there's any taker for a follow-up.
Just very briefly, I feel like I had a really powerful studio visit with Amy, and we talked about how histories usually pivot around and very specific viewpoints, and that's how it's usually Eurocentric. And so when we get to like histories of Cambodia or the Philippines, there's this way that it's spoken about where it seems like a marginalized history unrelated to what's happening. And what we kept talking about was that actually it's just as important and significant as other historical events. It's just been framed in a particular way that makes it seem quote unquote unrelated. So that's just a thought that came up for me.
I think a very wise friend of mine once said, in order to appreciate justice, we must be able to appreciate history. So for me, it's really important that these unravelings and understanding the histories of the places that we are occupying, continue to be brought to light so that people can make more informed choices going forward, because there's a lot of disinformation in the world right now. And as artists, we have a platform, so that duty is there's a civic sense of bringing forth the narratives of the people when that is constantly being drowned out. So I think that is where we function in terms of culture power and worldview shifting.
Absolutely.
Okay, we'll do one more quickly. This is for anybody of the five that wants to respond. But the question is, how has the pandemic and the increasingly visible social unrest affected your work? And whether or not you've discovered anything new about your work through this sort of more modified way of being.
I'd like to start. Just for me, I realized that I need that my inspiration came from a lot of people watching and a lot of long subway rides, where I used a lot of that to process a lot of the things that concepts and ideas that I have, and not having that has completely made me feel really isolated and sort of slowed down a lot of my art practice. And slowly I'm luckily coming out of that, and events like this are helping a lot for me.
I also agree with Gabriel. I mean, me being outside, it was usually something that was really positive for me. And I think what really helped me, especially for the pandemic, was I mean, obviously it's not the best way, like virtually, but to just continue the communications with the cohort and continuing on having studio visits. To me, continuing the dialogue around the practice that I was doing at the moment, whether it was what I was doing just before the pandemic, definitely helped and informed what was like the direction that I was going to be taking at this moment.
Mm-hmm.
If that's, unless anybody else wants to jump in, I'm going to wrap it up then for this session, and just say thank you so much to the viewers, and thank you again to the artists. I know I speak for everyone at LMCC when I say that your cohort, you've been a real inspiration to us all during these past few months. So thank you for that, and thank you for your incredibly important work. And then behind the scenes, also, I just quickly want to mention Tony, who's been our tech guru, the LMCC team, Joanne and Sophie, who handle all of our social media, Jasmine, who's been monitoring everything back in the back end, and of course, Deborah, who is our director of residency. She guides with great grace. So thank you so much to you as well. Thank you to Open House New York. And then just quickly to plug another project that we're presenting as part of Open House New York is the work of Garcia Wadood in collaboration with the artist Shannon Finnegan, titled Echo Exhibit. So there should be a link in the chat for that. So I hope you get to see a lot of the other things that Open House New York are doing over this wonderful weekend. And please check in on the YouTube LMCC channel to see the recording of this and also yesterday's session. So thank you and goodbye.